Welcome to Cleveland Conversations. If you are a reader of the Cleveland Plain Dealer or Cleveland.com, you have likely read some of the opinion pieces of one of our guests today, Professor Richard Perloff. Professor Perloff has become an institution unto himself, having been a member of the School of Communication at Cleveland State University for over 4 decades, as well as being the founding director of the school. He has won too many honors and awards in teaching and scholarship to name, but one in particular he was recently given was the Distinguished Professor at Cleveland University in last year, 2024. This is the highest honor that the university awards. So it's my pleasure to welcome Professor Richard Perloff.
Hi.
Welcome.
Hi. Nice to be here.
Yep. Well, when did you first become interested in communication?
Well,
turn back the clock a little bit.
The clock has to go back a long way. I was sports editor of my high school paper. I was a student at the Michigan Daily. I did interviews with people about attitudes. I wanted to know how their attitudes changed. I actually talked with the legendary psychologist Theodore Newcomb about how to draw a sample. And I was really interested in what students' attitudes were, and that was the attitude part. And then I majored in philosophy, so I was interested in logic and arguments. And then I was at Pitt. I got a master's at Pitt. And one day they were showing the film, The Triumph of the Will. And I was transfixed because it was just, the power of Hitler, the evil of Hitler, and how it was on film was just amazing. And I said, oh my gosh, that's really interesting. And then I studied the Milgram study. And that, of course, shows the way in which ordinary people can conform. And that really, the linkage between attitudes and how people felt and the power and how people persuade themselves. I've always been interested in the psychology of it, as I'll mention a little later. It just seemed like a natural for me. Mm-hmm. Although it didn't start out that way. I mean, the last thing I thought I would do was become a professor. And
were there any folks who influenced this decision of yours?
Well, in some ways, my parents were professors, and initially my inclination was not to walk toward them, but to run. I mean, the last thing I wanted to do was become a professor. I worked not to. I did everything I could, but in many ways they were very fine models. My dad was very unorthodox. In 1930s, he was on a bus in Philadelphia, and there was a black person who was standing, and he gave her his seat to them. I mean, who does that in the 1930s? He wrote letters to the editor, and my mother was one of the first measurement psychologist as a woman. I mean, she was doing this stuff in the 1950s. She was studying measurement, and she was asking questions. She kind of got me into empirical. You'd ask her a question. I say, I'm studying attitudes. Well, I'm writing a book on persuasion. She said, I don't know what that means. What is an attitude? I'm writing a book on persuasion. But what does that mean? She forced me to kind of think about things. And then of course, there was a professor I had at Michigan who asked questions like, Frithjof Bergman, what's wrong with us? If people were protesting, what's wrong with us, he asked. And he forced it on us. And then of course, here at Cleveland State, there was Leo Jeffries. Leo Jeffries was a great model for me. He's a wonderful retired person. He and I used to go out for pizza and beer all the time. Very supportive, very kind, and also was a heck of a researcher. So, and there were people who wrote books. The book The Social Animal, Alan Aronson was a model. Martin Fishbein, not at Illinois for just doing program research. So all these people, my parents, in terms of their trailblazing, unorthodox people who really were not conformists, were people who I admired. And I tried to really repress any kind of conformist streak I had, and I think that's what the study of persuasion helps you do.
Mm-hmm. And how did you end up at Cleveland State?
Well, that's not a hard question. I had a choice between UCLA and Cleveland State. I mean, like, why? Well, I guess I just don't like good weather. Well, in those days, and to some extent today, we had just a great department. I mean, it was nationally known. Sid Krause built the department, not on rock and roll like the song goes, but he built the department. He was a trailblazing scholar debates, and I met him. And to get an offer from here was amazing. It was amazing research faculty, and I was asked to be a visiting, it ended up to be kind of a labor of love. The thing about the department and later the school that was interesting was that there was a great deal of of openness in communication. There were norms. Sid Krauss was somebody who believed in democracy, so we had norms of democracy. We had norms in which we talked about things. We did not always get along. I mean, there were, oh my gosh, there were arguments all the time at faculty meetings, discussions, but there was a norm of expressing yourself, and so you would not gunny sack it. You would not compartmentalize it. You would bring it up with people. And I thought that, and there are other departments on campus where someone doesn't talk to this person. We would talk to people, and we always accepted talent. We might not like the person, if they were this, that, but you always respected ability, and there was a bottom line respect for research and teaching, and those values, and the fact that there was a kind of there were people who would go to Midwest Association of Public Opinion Research. It was a group. It was like boys on the bus, boys and girls on the bus. It was a very unique place. And here it was in Cleveland, and we were in downtown Cleveland, so and it was scholars. And so I love that part of it. I really did.
Mm-hmm. And you've authored 5 books, several with multiple editions, but your primary focus area and what you're most renowned for is the field of persuasion.
Right.
So recognizing that this is a lay audience, define persuasion for us.
Well, persuasion is a process by which a communicator tries to get you to change your own attitude. It's a process by which a communicator tries to get you. The onus is on you. The onus is on self-persuasion. That's why I study cults, because cult leaders from Jim Jones to more recent ones we've seen, even online cults like QAnon, they don't coerce people. Coercion is something different. They persuade them by laying the bait and getting us to persuade ourselves and finding our vulnerabilities. On the other hand, we also can change our own attitudes. We are the masters of our fate to some degree, and so we can stop smoking. We can be better people. And so persuasion is the art and the science of getting people, of finding messages, finding arguments, finding peripheral cues, finding symbols to get people to change themselves. It can be used controversially by Donald Trump. It can be used by Obama. It can be used by advertising. It can be used by social media influencers. And the panoply of persuasion, and also the power of it, the power of symbols. We have symbols like the mask. How did the mask, which is a public health thing, become a symbol? But it is. MAGA is a symbol. Symbols drive the world around. So that's very interesting to me, the power of symbols. How we get these, we can have people who are wonderful, wonderful people. They pay their bills, they're kind people to their kids, but when it comes to something like QAnon, they're very different. The symbols, and I'm interested in that. What makes people attracted to that? That's why I study attitude function. So, cults, I talk about the power of credible sources, the power of attractive people, the power of social influencers, and also how, and this is an important issue to me today, is how we can get people to vaccinate their kids. How is it that we have 1 out of 6 people in the country who are skipping vaccines because there's misinformation? No, we'll get to that later, but how can we use persuasion? Because we can't use it by, vaccine mandates don't work and they're unconstitutional. How can we get people to understand this? So all of these things are the panoply of persuasion, and they're interesting, they're important, and they're psychological, and they motivate me because I'm interested in people, I'm interested in the flaws of people, I'm interested in what makes us human and why we are so vulnerable to things, myself included. Why do we conform? Why don't we? How can we be the best people we are? And attitudes and persuasion can catapult us into a reality that helps us with that kind of question.
And you've alluded to this and spoken to this a little bit already, but more specifically, why are communication skills, persuasion skills, why have these remained so important over time from when we're talking about cathode ray tube TVs, now we're in social media driven environments, we're moving into artificial intelligence environments and the like, but yet these skills remain at the forefront in demand by employers, marketing, public relations. Why is that?
I mean, I think that is a great question. Nobody's really asked me in the decades I've been here. I think because for a couple of reasons. One, and it can go back actually before cathode rays, it can go back to the Greeks and Julius Caesar and the Romans, and power, because persuasion gives power. We go back to Shakespeare and Julius Caesar. Persuasion is an instrument by which people can achieve power over others, and power is important to people. It also lets people achieve their goals by persuading people. We know in the field of communication that one of the #1 phobias is public speaking. And so if you are a good public speaker, you can achieve your goals. You can be rich, you can be famous, you can do things you want. That's an important thing. It also can help you get over various emotional hurdles. You're not happy with yourself. You're chemically dependent. You're doing too much electronic, e-cigarettes. Persuasion can help us with those things. So for those reasons, it helps people go to other levels. But I think one of the reasons is frankly power. That persuasion helps people gain power, which is a fundamental aspect of life. And also it helps us get power on the job. It helps us achieve goals. And I think one of the things that I like about persuasion is it speaks to the eloquence of human beings, that ultimately what is persuasive, and this is, I think, one of the other aspects, even in an age of AI, it gets a little bit more controversial, the art of an argument. The art of an argument, of which goes back to Plato and Aristotle, the art of an argument is the quintessential aspect of a human being. And so if you can find people who can come up with arguments, that makes us stronger. And that is another, and I think the other thing I would say is symbols. As I said before, symbols, flags, whether it's the Israeli, Palestinian, American, gay pride, they motivate people. And so persuasion is about bringing groups together, social movements, change. All of these things are the armamentarium of persuasion. And of course, there's different ways of looking at persuasion. I'm more psychological. Some people are more social movement oriented. Mm-hmm. So all of those things, power, changing yourself, helping people, making money, all of those are under the rubric of persuasion. So of course it's going to be important.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, let's talk. You speak very passionately about your interests, speak very passionately about your scholarship. Let's talk about your teaching. How do you impart that to the students? What's your strategies? What's your philosophy of approaching that?
You know, that has increasingly been a great passion of mine, because I guess there's the old Hemingway line that universities, college should be a built-in bullshit detector. And I guess we all try to do that a little bit. What I try to do is I try to get students talking. I do not avoid controversy. I will talk about both sides of affirmative action, because there are two sides. And I think students appreciate that. We were talking, for example, about freedom of speech the other day, which has gotten very controversial. And there's a book by Nat Hentoff that says, freedom of speech for me, but not for thee. And we see that a lot, where people, well, I have my freedom, I want to talk what I want, but an employer may fire somebody because they don't have the particular philosophy they have. I discussed that the other day on some current controversies. I talk about the left. So I try to get people to talk about both sides. Sometimes students are reluctant to do that. And we can talk about Zoom. Sometimes people are reluctant because they don't want to say something that's politically incorrect or will make them look bad, which is understandable. So I try to bring people out without I tell them I'm naturally a devil's advocate. It's kind of a little like there was an academic there was a publisher I once had who said, academics are always about, I wonder if they have three hands, because they say on the one hand, on the other hand, I wonder if they really have three hands they try to use. And I also try to get people to not just be devil's advocate, I also try to get them to appreciate the relevance of certain things, like the Milgram study, where Milgram found back in 1964 that if a bunch of people were told that an authority figure was trying to get them to shock somebody, they would do that under the aegis of the authority figure. We apply that to the issue of Penn State, where you know about that, your own background, that the storied coach there, Joe Paterno, had turned a blind eye towards some of the issues there of child molestation. We talk about that with the thing with George Floyd, where another policeman had turned the blind eye. How that can happen. I want students to appreciate life. I really don't. I try to keep up as much as I can. I think I do a pretty good job. I want them to appreciate how this stuff. Not just the theories are important. I love theories. I get like my mother. I like to ask good, tough questions. But I think it's understanding that what's going on today. And so yes, we go into the Milgram stuff. I remember once in the pandemic, we also talk about politics. I remember in the pandemic, I had students stay for 45 minutes afterwards talking about Biden and Trump. And that's of course difficult. When you try to get people, you try to bring people out. And I think I try to do a decent job of it by showing enthusiasm, by showing tolerance. That's one of the things I try to model is tolerance. Very important value to me, tolerance.
Yeah, let's make sure, I really want one other thing I'd really like to have you speak to
Yeah.
is your non-academic writing.
Right.
So you're probably most widely known to a non-academic audience for opinion pieces, op-eds, various things. Many, a large number of them. You can probably answer exactly how many in various media outlets. Why is this something that you prioritize? Why do you do that?
A couple of reasons. First, always wanted to be a writer. Always want to be a writer. And I think if any of your students who are writers will appreciate that. If you want to write, that's your mantra. The other thing is that I like to write about people. I like to write about emotions. And I like to reach an audience, and I like to use words in a way that's kind of metaphorical. I enjoy that. I enjoy the editing. That's why I haven't done as much research. I've done a lot of research, and I've done a lot of scholarship. But I find the writing process going back. Some people hate writing. I actually enjoy editing and rewriting, so that is a joy to me. And also I've written about a lot of things that are important. I don't know if we want to talk. I've written about America, about patriotism. I love to celebrate people, and we can talk about that a little later. But I think sitting down there and trying to write a piece. Well, I've written about Kent State and the May 4th, and I've written about Emmett Till, now has a new anniversary. I think going back and trying to put in your own words something is very gratifying for me, because it's kind of like what Sarge said about water skiing. Water skiing, he said, was the ultimate existential act, because you are putting the person, the subject, on the object, and you're influencing. This existentialism is all about people creating their own, influencing the world by their own actions. There is no ultimate God to existentialism. It's getting a bit weird, but to me, writing is all about putting your own implant on the world. And so that is gratifying. You're doing something. You're there, and you can look at your own, and you can be pleased with it, and you can make a difference, and you can also get people to think. I mean, I've had people when I used to write when the Plain Dealer had their, and people wrote comments. People could be very brutal. One person looked at my picture once, and they said, "I can tell just by looking at him, he's a liberal." Now, I got my hair cut for this, so maybe I don't look like a liberal. Maybe I look more conservative today. Like, what? He looks like a. But I mean, so you reach people, and so I think that's gratifying, and you can have dialogue with people, and so those are the kind of the reasons I write.
And what are some of your favorite pieces?
Well, I thought about, when looking at that question, I thought a little bit about Bob Dylan, and I want to qualify this. Bob Dylan said once he wrote 5 songs. That was it, 5 songs. So I thought I've written 5 different types of pieces. I'm not comparing myself to Bob Dylan, although I do know Bob Dylan has not written a book about persuasion. So just putting that out there. But I kind of I thought about that. I mean, I've written about patriotism, about the importance of July 4th. I've written about history, about how we've had bias throughout history. I've written about dialogue, about how we should have national service in this country. John McCain, the Republican senator from Arizona, argued for that it's one way of bringing people together is to give them a joint goal, that the World War II generation. I've written about, and I'll answer your question, I've written about vaccines and vaccine skepticism. I've written about artsy things, about Stephen Sondheim, one of my great heroes, Send in the Clowns, and how he died 2021, and how I used to collect musical comedies as a kid growing up, and I wrote with Jeff Karam a piece of the English department about the 100th anniversary of F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. I've written about All in the Family. So those are 4 or 5 different areas. But for me, the thing that I think is the most central is celebrating people. Wrote a piece about Oppenheimer after the movie, about here was somebody who had the courage to challenge the bomb. Wrote about Emmett Till, about the tragedy and what he stood for. Then I wrote, I guess the one thing that's iconic a little bit is I've written a lot about May 4th and the tragedy at Kent State on May 4th, 1970. I wrote a piece for the New York Times in 2020, wrote a couple pieces for Scene magazine about that, about what the courage was. These were students. I remember those days, and I didn't always agree with those people because they were long hair, they were against America. But I came to, especially Alan Canfora, who was a real protester, I really came to admire the courage they had in standing up for what they believed that day on May 4th when they shot students who were exercising their First Amendment rights. And I understand the guard's perspective. I think I know that issue very well. It's very complicated. But I respected the courage of these people, especially in 1977. I remember interviewing Michael Schwartz, our president, when he was here, and he was president of Kent State, and he was telling me that the Carter White House was very concerned there was going to be another Kent State when the students were protesting the erection of a gymnasium over the hallowed sites of where the kids were killed. I understand why that would happen. But these people, they protested it. They said, we're not going to let this happen. And so I felt that I really was celebrating their courage. In a way, I was kind of getting some of the courage that I wished I'd had. And as I said about writing, about putting your imprint on, I feel like when I'm celebrating people, whether I'm celebrating Robert F. Kennedy Sr. Or I'm celebrating the Count Four and the Kent State people, or I'm celebrating Thomas Jefferson, who I thought was, despite his controversy, stood for important things. Had there not been Jefferson, we would not have had the gay rights movement. We would not have had the women's movement. We would not have had right because he stood for rights. I feel like that's very important. I don't want to be a Pollyannish positive, but I want to have people integrate the negatives of the past and also use my words to help them appreciate how we need heroes, how people can help us become better, and how our nation can become stronger with all of the immense problems that it has.
Yeah, let's finish up by having you speak about the latest technology, or one of the latest technologies to come down the line, which would be artificial intelligence.
Right.
Needless to say, that's going to have an impact on a lot of things, and the universities are no exception to that. Let me just, an open-ended question. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, okay. My personal thoughts, then how I try to look at it objectively. I am not a fan of artificial intelligence, Gen AI, for the simple reason of what I was saying earlier, that I think that it takes away from the existential strength of people. When you're writing, when you're creating, that's you. When you're even if you're borrowing something that something does, that is not you. That's not an existential act. That is an act of a machine. Now, that's my own view. Obviously, the world sees it differently. So my take on artificial intelligence is this: of course, it can do good things as far as medicine, and of course, it can help people research. To me, the most important question is the question we didn't ask when it came to other technologies, which is, what are the ways we can harness that for the good for society? That sounds a little bit Pollyannish, but let's take a look, for example, at NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement of the early 2000s, of the Clinton administration, 1996. No, I think it was 92, 93. Mm-hmm. When that happened, we went along with it because it was going to bring free trade. It turned out that put millions of American workers out of work. China, there was the economists called the China shock, where jobs, because the jobs were cheaper in China, we put millions out of work. It was indirectly responsible for the opioid crisis. And Democrats did this. They had good intentions. So we just put people out of work. We created a working class that was angry, and so with artificial intelligence, and it's just, I'm speaking ideally. We're not asking the right questions. Of course, it's important to use it. Putting aside my own biases, I try to be objective. Okay, but how many people are asking the right questions? How can we use this ethically to help people become better people? How can we use it not to put people out of work? Biden tried that, didn't work that well, and obviously there are complications. But on a university level, we had you organized. We had a couple of good speeches earlier on. How can the university use this to help students do a better job? There's some aspects of it. How can we use it to help people solve their interpersonal problems? What are the ways that we should not? Are there certain kinds of AI that should not be used? Frankly, it's probably beyond us, because capitalism destroys technology and moves on to new technology. And capitalism is the best economic system there has ever been for economics, but it's also one of the worst systems it is for human beings. Inequality, and what I worry about is the sociological, the human costs are going to be downstream, and they're going to be horrible. And I don't think we can solve it, but I wish we were asking the questions. And we can't even ask the questions because the political and economic forces are so great. So in my own corner of the sky, to quote the line from Pippin, I would like to wish we could ask those questions more. And I try to ask them in our division. I try to ask those questions in our school. But that, to me, are some of the important questions that I would like to ask.
Great. Professor Richard Perloff, Thank you so much for joining us, sharing some of your insights, sharing some of what you've learned through the years, and what your very valuable thoughts are on how we can start thinking about some of the issues of today. Thank you for watching this episode of Cleveland Conversations. We hope you enjoyed the interview.